Pre-code Hollywood was truly a wild era, especially when it came to disturbing films. With virtually no restrictions, directors and producers pushed storytelling to disturbing extremes, creating movies so shocking many still can't be screened today, even in 2025. If you think modern horror pushes boundaries, wait until you discover what filmmakers got away with nearly a century ago. So, grab your popcorn, dim the lights, and brace yourself as we explore the 15 most disturbing films from the pre-code Hollywood era. Let's dive in. Freaks, 1932. Let's kick off with a film that's not just disturbing for its content, but for how deeply it still unsettles audiences. Todd Browning's Freaks is a legend, and for good reason. Inspired by his own background in circus life, Browning went where no filmmaker had dared to go. He cast real sideshow performers with physical disabilities as the stars of his film. The plot centers on a beautiful trapeze artist, Cleopatra, who conspires with her lover to marry and murder a wealthy dwarf named Hans for his inheritance. But when the freaks discover the plot, they band together for a truly shocking revenge. The final act of Freaks is infamous. Cleopatra's fate is left largely to the imagination, but what is shown is disturbing enough. She's turned into a squawking, mutilated human duck, her hands and legs hacked away. The revenge sequence, filmed in rain and darkness, is chaotic, primal, and terrifying. Audiences were so appalled in 1932 that the studio cut more than 30 minutes from the original version, much of which is now lost. In fact, one woman at a test screening claimed the film caused her to miscarry. MGM was sued. The aftermath? Freaks was banned in the UK for 30 years, and its box office failure effectively ended Browning's Hollywood career. Yet today, the film is seen as a cult classic, lauded for its empathy toward its monstrous characters and its unflinching look at what society considers monstrous. The real horror isn't the so-called freaks, it's what normal people are willing to do for greed. This is pre-code cinema at its most fearless. Island of Lost Souls, 1932. Coming in hot at number 2, we've got Island of Lost Souls, Paramount's infamous adaptation of H.G. Wells's The Island of Dr. Moreau. Directed by Ursula C. Kenton and starring Charles Laughton in one of his most chilling roles, this film set new standards for what was considered too disturbing for mainstream audiences. The story follows a shipwreck survivor who ends up on an isolated island run by the mad Dr. Moreau. Moreau, in his quest to play God, is transforming animals into people through gruesome surgeries. Vivisection scenes that, even when implied, made audiences squirm. The atmosphere is thick with dread. The beastmen, tortured and pitiful, populate Moreau's domain, living in fear of the House of Pain. There's an underlying current of passionate menace too, especially in the subplot where Moreau hopes to mate his human-animal creation, Lauda the Panther Woman, with the protagonist. Banned in several countries and heavily cut in others, Island of Lost Souls still packs a punch. The combination of sweaty, oppressive sets, unsettling makeup, and Laughton's twisted performance as the leering Moreau makes this film a landmark in horror. It's an exploration of cruelty, blasphemy, and the boundaries of humanity that's as fascinating as it is nightmarish. Not for the faint of heart. Murders in the Zoo, 1933. At number 3, we have a film that many consider one of the most sadistic horrors of the pre-code era, Murders in the Zoo. Released by Paramount and starring the always menacing Lionel Atwill, this film doesn't pull its punches. From the very first scene, you know you're in for a rough ride. Atwill's character, a wealthy zoologist consumed by jealousy, punishes his wife's lover by having his mouth sewn shut with needle and thread, a shockingly graphic act for the early 1930s. And that's just the beginning. Throughout the movie, Atwill uses wild animals from his zoo to eliminate anyone who crosses him. Lions, snakes, and alligators become instruments of gruesome death. His own wife isn't safe, and the tension only builds as the bodies pile up. What makes Murders in the Zoo so disturbing isn't just the violence, but the cold, calculating way Atwill's character inflicts it. There's no supernatural force here, just pure, human malice hiding behind a civilized facade. Audiences were scandalized. Some theaters cut or even banned the film outright. It stands as a reminder that sometimes the worst monsters don't have claws or fangs. They just have a grudge and a willingness to use anything at their disposal for revenge. The Black Cat, 1934. Let's talk about The Black Cat, one of the darkest and most stylish horror films Universal ever produced. Released just months before the strict enforcement of the Hays Code, this film is the stuff of nightmares. And not just because it stars Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi at their most sinister. The plot follows a newlywed couple who end up trapped in the modernist fortress of a Satan-worshipping architect after a bus accident. Lugosi plays a doctor bent on vengeance. This movie breaks all kinds of taboos. Karloff's character keeps the preserved bodies of women in glass cases, participates in satanic rituals, and is ultimately skinned alive by Lugosi in a scene that's shocking, even when mostly implied. The film's sense of doom is relentless. Expressionist sets, discordant music, themes of trauma and war, and a script loaded with blasphemy and sadism. Censors demanded cuts, but even the trimmed version was a scandal. The Black Cat is proof that pre-code horror could be both visually stunning and deeply unsettling, combining psychological torment with graphic violence. This is a masterpiece of atmosphere and dread. The Most Dangerous Game, 1932. Next up, The Most Dangerous Game, a survival thriller with a premise so primal and disturbing that it's been copied and parodied ever since. Directed by Ernest B. Schoedsack and Irving Peichel, this film is all about turning the hunter into the hunted. The story? A big game hunter, bored with animals, decides to hunt the only prey that can provide a challenge: humans. He lures shipwrecked survivors to his remote island only to set them loose in the jungle and stalk them for sport. The film doesn't shy away from the horror of its concept. There are decapitated human heads mounted as trophies, scenes of merciless pursuit, and a pervasive sense of dread. At the time, this was almost too much for audiences. The idea of hunting people for pleasure was shocking, and the film's execution is surprisingly intense even today. If you think modern movies invented the deadly game genre, think again. The Most Dangerous Game did it first, and did it with style and brutality that few have matched since. Frankenstein, 1931. Is there any classic horror more iconic and more disturbing than James Whale's Frankenstein? While it's become a staple of Halloween and pop culture, it's easy to forget how deeply shocking this film was in its day. Adapted, loosely, from Mary Shelley's novel, Frankenstein tells the story of a scientist who creates life from the bodies of the dead, only to abandon his monstrous creation. The film's most infamous scene, cut from many prints for decades, shows the monster accidentally drowning a little girl, thinking she will float like the flowers they were tossing into the lake. The implication of child death at the monster's hands was unheard of at the time, and is still deeply unsettling. Whale's film is packed with blasphemous themes, playing God, challenging the boundaries between life and death, and the consequences of human hubris. Boris Karloff's performance as the monster is both tragic and terrifying, and the makeup effects were the stuff of nightmares. Even after all these years, the loneliness and violence of the monster can get under your skin. Frankenstein is pre-code horror at its most profound. It asks not just what it means to be human, but what it means to be responsible for the life you create. The Mask of Fu Manchu, 1932. Let's take a sharp turn into pure pulp villainy with The Mask of Fu Manchu. This MGM film, starring Boris Karloff as the titular villain, is notorious for its mix of sadism, racism, and lurid torture scenes. It's the kind of movie that makes you cringe on multiple levels. The plot is a globe-trotting adventure with archaeologists and evil masterminds racing to uncover the tomb of Genghis Khan. But Karloff's Fu Manchu isn't just a standard mad scientist. He's a sadistic, cackling torturer who delights in elaborate punishments. There's a scene where he prepares to whip a captive while taunting him about Christian martyrdom, and another where he threatens to impale his enemies. Myrna Loy plays his equally cruel daughter, adding another layer of perverse energy. Modern viewers are likely to be disturbed by the film's blatant racism and stereotypes, but even at the time, censors objected to the film's violence and passionate innuendo. It was heavily cut in the UK and other markets, but the sheer gleefulness of its villainy still comes through. The Mask of Fu Manchu is a fascinating and troubling example of how pre-code films went, places mainstream movies wouldn't dare for decades after. The Mummy, 1932. Universal's The Mummy is remembered as a monster movie classic, but it's also a surprisingly disturbing film, especially for audiences in 1932. Directed by Karl Freund and starring Boris Karloff as the ancient Imhotep, this film blends romance, horror, and the supernatural with some genuinely shocking moments. The story involves the resurrection of Imhotep, an ancient Egyptian priest who was mummified alive as punishment for forbidden love. Karloff's performance is mesmerizing. His Imhotep is both tragic and terrifying, and his relentless pursuit of his reincarnated lover is filled with both longing and menace. One of the film's most unsettling moments comes in a flashback to Imhotep's death. We see slaves murdered to protect the pharaoh's tomb, and Imhotep himself buried alive, struggling as he's wrapped and sealed away. The makeup effects, requiring hours to apply and remove, transform Karloff into a living corpse, and the film's atmosphere is thick with doom and ancient curses. At a time when audiences were just getting used to talking pictures, the sight of a bandaged corpse coming to life was enough to give anyone nightmares. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1931. Few stories explore the darkness within as effectively as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Ruben Mamoulian's 1931 adaptation is still one of the best and most disturbing versions ever filmed. Frederick March won an Oscar for his dual performance as the respectable doctor, Jekyll, and his monstrous alter ego, Hyde. What sets this version apart is how graphic and psychologically intense it is for its time. The transformation scenes use groundbreaking makeup and camera tricks to show Jekyll's body twisting and mutating into Hyde. But it's not just about special effects. The violence is deeply personal. Hyde's relationship with Ivy, a vulnerable barmaid, is one of the most distressing elements, featuring implied erotic assault, sadistic torment, and murder. The film's take on repression, addiction, and the beast lurking beneath the surface of every man was raw and unfiltered in 1931. Many sequences were cut or censored in later releases, but even in its trimmed form, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a savage examination of human nature and a reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones inside us. Mystery of the Wax Museum, 1933. Before House of Wax, 1953, came this nightmarish original. Mystery of the Wax Museum is famous for being one of the first horror films shot in two-color Technicolor, which only makes its visuals more disturbing. The story follows a deranged sculptor, horribly disfigured in a fire, who murders people and encases their bodies in wax to replenish his ruined exhibits. Glenda Farrell and Fay Wray star, but the real stars are the gruesome set pieces, wax faces that seem too lifelike, dark corridors, and the threat of being immortalized in wax while still alive. Director Michael Curtis doesn't shy away from the violence. There's a murder with a knife, a discovery of blood-red wax, and the ever-present fear of being captured and made into a museum exhibit. The color palette, with its sickly greens and reds, only amplifies the unease. Mystery of the Wax Museum blends gothic horror with grand guignol gore, making it one of the most visually and thematically disturbing films of its era. The Invisible Man, 1933. James Whale strikes again with The Invisible Man, one of the smartest and most disturbing science fiction horror films of the pre-code era. Based on H.G. Wells's novel, this film features Claude Rains as the scientist who discovers a way to become invisible only to go mad with power. The real horror of The Invisible Man is psychological. Once invisible, the protagonist abandons all morality, embarking on a spree of increasingly vicious crimes. He robs banks, causes a train wreck that kills hundreds, and murders without remorse, all while taunting his victims. The chilling line, "A reign of terror, death, death, death," captures the film's tone perfectly. What made this movie so shocking in 1933 was how it suggested that the greatest danger isn't science, it's the person wielding it. The special effects were revolutionary, but it's the violence and glee with which the Invisible Man spreads chaos that truly unsettles. Whale balances dark humor with moments of real menace, leaving audiences to wonder, if no one could see you, what would you do? The Old Dark House, 1932. Another atmospheric shocker from James Whale, The Old Dark House is less about gore and more about psychological terror. Set in a gloomy, storm-battered mansion, the film brings together a group of travelers who take refuge with a bizarre, violent family hiding secrets, and maybe a killer, in their home. The sense of unease grows as the guests realize that not everyone in the house is sane or even safe. There are hints of cannibalism, dangerous patriarchs, and an atmosphere thick with physical repression and madness. The combination of grotesque characters, shadowy cinematography, and pitch-black humor makes this film a standout. In its day, The Old Dark House was considered too odd for many mainstream audiences, but it has since become a cult classic. It set the standard for spooky house movies and is a masterclass in how atmosphere and character can create horror just as powerfully as blood and guts. White Zombie, 1932. White Zombie is considered by many to be the first ever zombie film, and it's a deeply disturbing look at mind control, slavery, and death. Bela Lugosi stars as Murder Legendre, a plantation owner in Haiti who uses voodoo to turn people into mindless zombies to work in his fields. The horror here isn't just supernatural, it's existential. The victims lose their will, their minds, and ultimately their lives, doomed to shuffle endlessly in service to a cruel master. The film's atmosphere is nightmarish. Shadowy plantations, hypnotic rhythms, and the unblinking eyes of the walking dead. In the 1930s, the implications of zombification, being robbed of free will, treated as property, had clear social resonance, and the film doesn't shy away from these themes. White Zombie is a creepy, hypnotic film, and even after almost a century, its images and ideas can still haunt you. Peeping Tom, 1932. Not to be confused with the infamous 1960 British film, this Peeping Tom is a lesser-known but boundary-pushing pre-code drama. It tells the story of a disturbed voyeur whose obsession with watching others leads to increasingly dangerous behavior. What makes this film disturbing for its time is its willingness to explore the mind of a predator, not just as a villain, but as a character whose compulsions are never glamorized. There are moments of implied physical violence, murder, and a general sense of unease as we see the world through the protagonist's twisted gaze. While many prints of the film have been lost or are incomplete, the legend of this early psychological thriller persists. It paved the way for later films about obsession and voyeurism, showing that even in the 1930s, Hollywood could stare into the darkness of the human mind. The Beast of the City, 1932. Rounding out our list is The Beast of the City, a gangster film that shocked audiences with its violence and bleak view of justice. Starring Walter Houston as a police captain who takes the law into his own hands, the film was made in response to public outcry about the glamorization of gangsters, but it ended up pushing the limits of screen violence. The film's climax is a bloody, drawn-out shootout that leaves most of the main characters dead. It's nihilistic, violent, and grim, a far cry from the reassuring endings audiences were used to. There's also a hard-edged undercurrent of cynicism, suggesting that corruption is everywhere, and justice is little more than a fleeting hope. For the early 1930s, this was deeply disturbing stuff, and the film was attacked by censors and politicians for its brutality. Today, it's a fascinating look at how even mainstream genres like the gangster film could push moral and narrative boundaries in the pre-code era. And there you have it, 15 of the most disturbing films pre-code Hollywood had to offer. Some are classics, some are cult oddities, but all of them help define an era when movies weren't afraid to look into the darkest corners of the human psyche. Which ones have you seen? Which ones are you adding to your watch list? Let us know. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more journeys into cinema's wildest history. Until next time, keep watching, if you dare.